Welcome, welcome to all of you. My name is Louise Tyler. I am co-chairing the Urban Settlements Working Group of the Global Shelter Cluster, together with Seki Irano and Mohamed Hilmi, as well as Julie King, who will introduce themselves in a minute. And we are really thrilled to host this conversation today as part of the HNPW about localization and the role NGOs can play in empowering local authorities. So maybe to start, we can give you a bit of a snapshot of what the Urban Settlements Working Group is, what we've been doing, and then we'll introduce the topic and our panelists for today's discussion. So in short, the Urban Settlements Working Group of the Global Shelter Cluster was launched back in 2017 by Interaction Impact Initiative in CRS. And the purpose of this working group was to explore how humanitarian actors can find better ways to work in urban areas, and how area-based approaches and settlements-based approaches can support more effective humanitarian action in a multi-sectoral way. So we've been convening conversation for the past 5 years, not only with humanitarian stakeholders, but also across sectors with local governments, local NGOs, and academics. And the idea was to document what innovations humanitarian practitioners and local humanitarian actors were developing on the ground for better urban responses to urban crises. So this has very much been launched by Seki Irano and Hilmi Mohamed. Maybe you guys want to say hello to the group today before we move on.
Hello, my name is Seki Irano from Catholic Relief Services. I'm the Homes and Communities lead of the agency, and yeah, we've been on this journey for a while with the chairs, and it's really delightful to be with you all to further the conversation. Looking forward to today. Thanks.
Hi guys, my name is Mohamed Hilmi. I am with Interaction in Washington, D.C. We were one of the three organizations with the help of Global Shelter Cluster and a number of donors started this working group, and great to see a good interest today from a wider audience. Welcome. Thank you. Julie, do you want to go ahead? Thank you.
Yes, hi everyone. My name is Julie King. I work with Hilmi at Interaction on our Shelter and Settlements workstream. Really excited to hear from our panelists today.
I just wanted to give a plug for, as the Urban Settlement Working Group, we had been working for a couple of years now we started with collating case studies from across the globe called Area-Based Approaches in Urban Settings, compilation of different case studies which has done this type of work. And then from that, what we did was to create a guidance note on the settlement approach, and kind of making it easy for us to kind of define. And these were the three categories of conceptual framework that we came up with. Defining, like we're working within the settlement in a defined boundary, and then working multi-sectorially, considering the whole population, and then working with multi-stakeholders, not just humanitarians. And I think this is where, like, today's conversation is going to be really interesting for like the local government, really working with the local government as an essential part of the solution. So I'll stop there, and we're going to probably share the links to this document in the chat. And over to you, Lou. Thanks.
Thank you, Seki. So I'm going to introduce our panelists today from NRC and AGORA by saying that what they will show us today is that there's a lot that the humanitarian sector can learn from engaging more proactively with local governments. Although this may not be part of our DNA, this may not be our primary focus, there's a lot that we can learn from that engagement, that type of partnership with local governments when the context is conducive, and that also has benefits for the long-term impact of our programs. So I will now invite Maha Ayubi and Rehaine Mozaffari, who are shelter and settlement specialists for the Norwegian Refugee Council. And they will tell us about a program that's taking place in Beirut and where they have been making huge efforts to support the municipality from within to answer and to meet the crises around internal displacement and urban refugees. So Rehaine and Maha, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Louise. And again, thanks for the Urban Settlements Working Group for the invitation. I'm very glad we're able to speak about this topic for the second year now. So for those who have participated last year, you might remember we were at the stage of like explaining how we're establishing the framework of the settlements-based approach in Lebanon, and how like in terms of the design that could work in the Lebanese context. And we were able to go more into that, and this is why you see both of us here, because I have left Lebanon after that phase, and then Rehaine has stepped in. So like we will be presenting this together. I will be focusing more on like the design components on that topic, and Rehaine will be speaking more about her experience in implementing the project that I designed. So over to you, Rehaine.
Yes, hello everyone. I hope everybody is doing well. As Maha mentioned, I came in at the implementation phase. We are doing a settlement-based approach project in 5 municipalities currently in Lebanon. It has a big component of housing with the legal aspect, with the HLP aspects, community infrastructure upgrading, and municipality support, which we will be focusing on. Thank you. And I'm in Lebanon, so in case my connection might be not so reliable, in that case, Maha will continue. Electricity is definitely an issue.
We hear you perfectly, Rehaine. Do you want to share your screen? I know you have a great presentation ready somewhere.
Yes, I think Maha is doing it now.
Okay.
So can you see my screen now?
Yes, just go on presentation mode, then I would say.
Am I doing it right?
Yeah.
It's good.
All right. So, oh, I'm sorry. We're advanced in this. So, today we will be presenting like the topic that we'll be focusing on in that entire like complex process of actually implementing settlement-based approaches is the localization, like the need for the adaptation of localization in a financial crisis. So going back to the beginning of all of this and to last year's presentation, just a recap on it. So we were discussing how we have at the design phase thought about what are the operational conditions that would enable a localization process or approach to be sustainable. And so as you can see in the scheme, there are 4 main components to that. In the center of it is a lead agency, which usually would be the humanitarian organization or another development approach that has interest in local development. And this is the agent that leads the process and whose role would be expected to start to diminish eventually, leading to more space for the other local actors to take bigger roles. So on the second level, we do have the municipalities, and municipalities are another lead of that process, and their mandate, as we all know, is more local. So what they do is basically enable the coordination between the lead humanitarian agency and the other local actors in the area. They're also given their accountability, their level of accountability. They are regarded as a partner during the implementation. On a wider level, we have the local actors, and the local actors could be anything from local NGOs or community-based organizations or religious groups or neighborhood committees, depending on the social construct of the communities. And then on the wider term, we have a fourth level of engagement, which is from the regional actors, or also sometimes the national actors, in case regional actors are not mandated in their specific regions. And these are the actors who support the implementation of the response plans that are recommended in a certain area, and they provide them with their operational and legal frameworks. So here we do see that municipalities are at the core, and the question is, what if municipalities lose the appetite or even the capacity to play that role during the implementation? So our municipalities, is the role of municipalities negotiable in that process, or do agencies have to themselves adapt their ways and their approach to keep that proximate and constant primary accountable actor engaged in that whole process? And how do we do it when the challenges are very significant? So also, I guess it would be important to provide a little bit of background regarding the situation in Lebanon at the moment. So for years in Lebanon, there has been a political and economic crisis that was growing. And in 2020, the country has seen a very steep degradation in its entire system. So for one, the national currency, for example, has witnessed one of its most significant devaluation in years. There was a decline as well in the support from the international community, going from a shaken trust with the administration running the country. And on top of this, there was an explosion, which we're all familiar with, which has blown the country's main port and has left like tens of thousands of destroyed homes and also shattered livelihoods in the country's capital. So today, Lebanon is facing one major economic crisis, and this, of course, starts at the level of the government and then trickles down onto the central governments, which include, of course, the municipalities. So at the moment, municipalities are, we cannot say municipalities are capable of fulfilling their roles in local development, and that is more than ever, or to be a very encouraged, engaged partner in localization. And that has happened, that weakening of the role of the municipalities has been witnessed during the progress of the implementation of NRC's settlement-based approach. So here, as I explained, it starts at the national level, but it actually trickles down to municipalities. And so what we had to do was to take a step back and to acknowledge that we need to readapt in order to enhance the municipalities' willingness and meaningful engagement. So we had to shift the priority from looking at long-term development projects into giving a priority to what are the minimum viability areas that could keep these municipalities going, and to keep them both interested and capable of like understanding and practicing the role that we have already described in that whole process. So localization in its essence is a process of keeping the local partners enabled and engaged, and understanding the local challenges and having the space and the willingness to readapt what we thought at first would be the priorities is very crucial throughout the process. There's a lot of things that we need to unlearn and new things that we need to acknowledge in order to meet the longer term objectives of our intervention. So now I'll hand over to Rayhane, who will go more into the details of what I was just speaking about with what was going on with the project implementation in Lebanon. Over to you, Rayhane.
Thank you. Thank you, Maha. Yes, in terms of implementation, I also wanted to touch a bit on the housing component, which is not included here, but I think it's relevant also in municipality commitment, because in Lebanon, especially when it comes to housing, the government, like even before the financial crisis and everything, the local municipality had a hard time to deal with the housing needs, affordable housing and such. So they are really happy when NGOs, they step in. So this project is following a settlement-based approach, meaning we provide based on the vulnerability. So like 70%, almost 70% of the beneficiaries are Lebanese, and the rest are Syrian, migrant workers, and other nationalities. And what had been really successful, as it was envisioned by Maha and other colleagues, that the municipality, we would have a specific, once we select the municipality, they would have a essential role in picking the most vulnerable neighborhood, and we would have a buy-in from the community. So we have an MOU with each municipality, and it has really worked in terms of accountability. Whenever we have like problems, for example, some houses, they don't have ownership documents, they've been able to really help. When it came more problematic, it was more for the community infrastructures that it was a part of the project, and we had to upgrade. And normally, so we did a focus group discussion with the community, we did key informant interviews with municipality, like technical people and mayors. And usually the type of work that you do, or the NGOs they do, it could be like, for example, site and street improvements, like people usually ask for like parks, or like the things that, you know, the wish list. But because of the situation in Lebanon, what we faced was that some of the big infrastructure projects like clinics, schools, affordable housing, which I mentioned, that normally would be municipality projects, they have been left unfinished. And then when we discuss, so like we thought it might be useful to rethink how we go about the project. So in the picture, you see a clinic in Muhammara, which is one of the municipalities that we are working on in north of Lebanon, close to Tripoli. So this is a clinic project that the municipality started. The first floor was finished. And then once in 2018-19, when the financial situation started becoming more dire, it stopped. So next. Yeah, so this is just in the result of a focus group discussion that we had with the community members. We did different focus group discussion with different groups, youth, women, male, and these were some of the usual requests. A lot of, like, of course, like solar lighting because of the electricity issues. The clinic came up in Muhammara rightfully because that's the only one that they have. But the point of this is, like, then with the donor we discussed, with the municipality we discussed, and we thought like finishing the clinic would be more useful to the whole people of not only this neighborhood that we selected, but for the whole municipality. as opposed to doing some site or street improvement. So that's one adjustment that had to happen. And luckily, we had the flexibility with the project and the donor to do that. So this clinic is supposed to be renovated. Next. And the other aspect that it was really important, especially also for housing components, Maha, if you could go back, we had a number of town hall meetings, which was important to, for example, for the community to understand how we select the beneficiaries, how we select the like infrastructure. And normally, I mean, we were really happy for the active participation of the community, but I think once you have a situation in a country like Lebanon, it even becomes more important for the participation and buy-in of the communities and municipality in terms of how you select a beneficiary. And we were able to at least have a general agreement from the community that the neighborhoods that we selected, they were the most vulnerable, and also like with our vulnerability criteria that we had. Next. And then lastly, so what we had envisioned in terms of municipality, or Maha had envisioned in terms of municipality capacity building, was more in terms of disaster risk management, GIS integration, and even in terms of like secondment of municipality support assistant, that they would be sitting in the municipality and helping them. But when we investigated about what they really need now because of the situation, it was, I mean, it was surprising, but not surprising, the list of items that they really needed urgently. For example, it would be like fuel for fire trucks, even though the civil defense in Lebanon is in charge of fire trucks, but municipalities, they usually also have a fire response group, and sometimes even the civil defense fire trucks, they said, man, they don't have wheels, they don't have fuels, they are in need of general maintenance. So the question for us was like how we would want to respond to this urgent and immediate needs, which has like a huge impact on the community, but at the same time not lose sight of the more long-term and strategic vision and impacts that we would want to have. So now we are like balancing it with responding to some of these needs, but at least making sure that there's a disaster risk management plan in place, there's a GIS integration plan is in place, and at least there's a long-term goal, and we could do also some of those long-term ones. So yeah, that's all from, and I see there are some questions which we will be happy to respond.
Hello, my name is Stephanie Luz, and I'm happy to share this presentation for you on UN Habitat's work in Burkina Faso and how international actors can enhance the sustainability of interventions in unstable and politically insecure urban displacement contexts. Burkina Faso is a small country which is part of the Sahel region, and as you all know, the Sahel region has recently been facing a series of political coups, including in Chad, Guinea, Mali, Sudan, unsuccessfully in Guinea-Bissau and Niger, and on the 24th of January there was a military coup in Burkina Faso. It needs to be said that the region in general is politically as well as security-wise unstable. And of course, the political situations do have a strong impact on the humanitarian and development work because we're losing a lot of partners. But let's start from the beginning. Let's just say we are in a context where in the last 3 years, a multidimensional crisis in Burkina Faso has become one of the most dynamic and devastating crises for the civilian populations in the central Sahel zone. including the three Sahel Central countries, Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso. As you can see on the left side, this is the region we're talking about. On the other two slides, you can see that, of course, we do have a lot of demographic growth in the Sahel region in general, which means that the population is growing fast. And the lower slide, the lower picture, is that you can see that that was actually half a year ago, there were 1.2 internally displaced in Burkina Faso, but by now we have up to 2 million, as I will showcase later. So Burkina Faso, as said before, is a country which has approximately 21 million people, a population growth of 2.93 per year, and it is one of the poorest countries in the world, with more 40% of the population living below the national poverty line. The current urbanization rate is about 26%, which has been rising very fast. You can see that Burkina Faso is neighbored by Mali, by Niger, and well, it's a landlocked country, as you can see. Some more basic facts. I think what I want to really focus on is actually not only the population growth that you can see on the left side, but also that we do have a strong increase in urban population, which is actually very strongly also linked to the displacement situation, because we do have approximately 10% of the population who by now have fled their homes, and many of them have actually moved to urban areas. This has led to a rapid growth of secondary cities and also the so-called chef-lieu. So of each municipality, you always have a chef-lieu. And as you can see on the left side, that is a picture from, that is a graph from 2005. And this is what we have today. You can actually see that not only Ouagadougou, which is right, let me just see, which is right here, but also the other secondary cities like Kaya, like Dori, like Bobo, they have grown rapidly, and specifically in the north, they have actually grown because of the internal displacement. As I said, there are approximately 2 million people who are internally displaced at the moment in Burkina Faso because of the decreasing security situation. Mainly, as you can see here, the internal population is coming from those regions. They are moving south, but the other areas around Burkina Faso's borders have actually been also strongly impacted by rapid urban growth due to, well, conflict around many different topics. What we've seen, that the situation after the coup d'etat on 24th of January, which was done in order to change the security situation and regain the integrity of the country, the situation sadly has not changed security-wise. It's actually getting worse, in addition to external factors such as the Ukraine crisis or the Russia crisis, which have led to an increase of fuel and food prices. And of course, we are impacted in Burkina Faso by climate change impact, which on the one hand reduce rainfall and lead to drought, but on the other hand, we do have strong rainfall, which comes as sort of, well, not as a surprise, but it leads to increased risk of flooding, specifically in non-planned urban areas. So what are some specific challenges in the context of internal displacement? One very important fact is, of course, that IDPs are citizens. So, of course, the state does have a responsibility to take care of its citizens, but that is often not the case. And so it is really very much urgently needed that alongside humanitarian aid, durable solutions must be found, so that we don't create parallel structures or just improve the lives of selected people, but actually make sure that all people, because they're all citizens of Burkina Faso, can actually benefit from interventions also because there is, of course, some pressure regarding return, but in the end, of course, citizens have the liberty of movement. Also, we need to make sure that local authorities are the main actors in this search for solutions. And it also, we need to take into account that existing plans and strategies for development that those local actors will be taken into account when planning any sort of intervention. The capacity of the local actors is often, specifically in the small urban centers, very weak. But in the end, those capacities need to be strengthened in a longer run, so people also regain confidence in the state authorities, which is an important means to actually keep peace. The displaced and host communities live in the same neighborhoods, which are often unplanned, which are underserviced, and sometimes also informal because they're in zone non-loti, which means they were not actually already approved for settlements. And also it needs to be said that the vulnerability of local populations is also very high. So often they don't have access to services, to adequate housing, and are very vulnerable to intergeneration opportunities. So in order to strengthen social cohesion and not to weaken it and create mistrust between communities, we need to make sure that interventions, or at least that is UN Habitat's philosophy, that interventions benefit both host and local community and IDP communities which are living in the same neighborhood. Also, we know, based on global data, that migration displacement to urban areas is not temporary, but actually accelerates urbanization processes. And then on this picture, we actually see what happens. We do have some parts of the city or an urban area which are actually planned, which are formal, which have services. And then we have very large parts which, you know, are sort of informal structures where there's no access roads, where people or even ambulances cannot even pass and reach people, but also where it's really difficult to establish in a later term basic services, and that actually creates living conditions in the long run which are not sustainable. What we see in Burkina Faso in the displacement context is that many families have actually found shelter with local communities, so there's been a tremendous solidarity, and of course local authorities have played a strong role for finding space. But as the situation becomes protracted, because the situation has been ongoing since 2016 with peak displacements from 2018 onwards and still ongoing, there is a need to strengthen local authorities for the provision of services, of food, to make sure that people live in adequate living environments, that water is available and firewood, and as most populations come from rural areas, that there's also arable land, which is very difficult to have in Burkina Faso, made available in order to ensure IDPs have some livelihood opportunities. Here's some scenes how IDPs have settled around and in urban areas. You can see it's still like tents in many cases. Some have settled in the middle of urban areas, but still, you know, a mixture of tents. And then when protected, when the situation gets protected, we can actually see that many IDPs find the possibilities to move from really temporary structures to to more permanent structures, but of course in areas where they really miss basic services like water, like access to schools and health centers. So UN Habitat's project, let me just present that very fast, is on strengthening the resilience of local authorities impacted by massive urban displacement. It's a 2-year project funded by the European Union, by the instrument contributing to stability and peace. And our main outputs, like physical outputs, include the construction of classroom, extension of schools, health centers, and also housing units in the 4 cities most impacted by the crisis. We do have an integrated approach. That means we're trying to work not in sectors, in municipal sectors, but we're actually trying to say that our project aims to really respond to the basic needs of displaced as well as local communities, which means they do need access to education, they do need access to health, and they do need access to adequate living environments. The project has also a strong focus on the capacity building of local authorities to better manage in long-term rapid urban growth. So that means we're also touching on land rights. We're using integrated urban planning approaches. We also have an element on environmental protections and have social economic topics covered, including gender-based violence, reduction of gender-based violence, but also some social economic development activities which focus specifically on women in vulnerable situations. We have created at local level, we have established together with the local authorities, the so-called Cellules Municipales pour la Résilience Urbaine, which are local cross-sectoral bodies, including the representative of, the different ministries, but also public service providers, local leaders, which means landowners, and also representatives of displaced communities. And they are actually our main their main decision-making body in our project, because they are the ones who actually took jointly the decisions what we actually needed to implement, and also helped us decide which would be the best locations in the city for the different investments made. The meetings of the Cellules Municipales pour Résilience also ensured that there was an increased dialogue, and that activities really made sure that their local and displaced communities that are included in the processes at every stage. Those are the different outputs, and you can read them at the end of the presentation. But in the end, as I said, we're covering the increased institutional capacity. We're fostering integrated urban approaches. We do have a construction element, and we're also having an element on reducing the environmental impact through increased awareness of the populations. Those are some pictures that we actually had during our project's implementation. So the participatory planning processes and mapping processes, we have, of course, the construction side. We also have activities around waste management and community awareness, and we do have the plans which show the different housing locations in the project. Here's an example of Dori. So what has been the difficulty since there's been the coup d'etat? The coup d'etat in Burkina Faso, of course, meant a dismissal of national government authorities by army actors, and it of course meant that many international actors were unable or unwilling or unsure how to continue with their operations. That also meant, first of all, budgets were frozen. But from the political perspective, it also meant that, of course, the head of state, government ministers, as well as elected mayors were sort of dismissed from one day to another, which of course meant for international actors that their counterparts were, well, from one day to another, no longer the same people. It has taken quite a while to establish new local governance structures, the Délégation Spéciale, who are replacing the mayors. And even though the coup d'etat was end of January, those Délégation Spéciale have just recently established, which means beginning of May. And of course, the priorities from the de facto authorities from the transition government, as it's called now, has actually changed. And in order to secure the territory, there are now strong efforts on return and not so much on other durable solutions, which also include the local integration or the resettlement. As I said, there were also some decisions taken by the new structures to stop investments in displacement contexts in order to, of course, facilitate return, which means we do struggle a bit to sort of continue the implementation of our projects, and we hope that those decisions to stop all investments will be taken back, or specifically for because this does not only impact our project, but it really impacts a lot of other humanitarian and development projects on the ground as well. So what has been useful, or what other challenges that we definitely faced, is because of the degrading security situation. And of course, that meant that any sort of controls, because some roads were actually blocked because of the security situation, UN staff members were no longer allowed to travel by road to different locations, which of course made the control of construction site and the exchanges with local actors very difficult. And on the other hand, of course, we lost, as I said before, our counterparts at local level, and we did have some activities that actually meant that we wanted to bring together actors from the different locations, which of course, because of the security situation, has become very difficult. So what are our lessons learned specifically working in this politically insecure, unstable urban displacement context? We really think that it is specifically important to ensure that there's a humanitarian development peace nexus approach to make sure that any activities result in long-term improvement of living conditions for local and displaced communities, that there is greater coordination and decentralization for improving the capacities of local actors, specifically at technical level, because while heads of states, ministers, and even mayors are simply replaced, are often replaced, there are the technical level who actually stay in place. And this is why we actually think that the Nexus approach usually fosters the technical level and strengthens the municipal leadership, which, in our project has proven very useful, for example, when we speak about the Cellule Municipale de Résilience, because those actors are still in place and they do take a strong ownership in the project and in the outcome. The second level, as I said before, is really working at technical level to make sure that the activities continue, and also that there is learning at technical level on how to actually, deal with a similar situation even after a humanitarian priority might be gone, but also, and as that's what we're seeing at the moment with the Ukraine crisis as well, after that, there's a new humanitarian crisis and a lot of funding is actually channeled to other situations. This is why we need to make sure that there is an structural change, that there's transformative changes that actually also reduce the root causes of conflicts, and that cannot be done after humanitarian crisis, but it really needs to be done really from the beginning to ensure that one crisis doesn't lead to another. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope I managed to answer some of your questions. And in case you do need to reach out to me, please feel free to ask additional questions via mail. My mail is stephanie.luz@un.org. Thank you for attention. Bye.
Hello everyone. Apologies once again for the technical hitch that meant I couldn't give this presentation in real time. But my name is Sarah. I work with the AGORA team in the Central African Republic. and I'm going to give you the presentation about the capacity building of local authorities that our team, linked with the team in Niger, carried out. And afterwards, I want to explain why we did these projects and how other humanitarian actors can deliver similar kinds of capacity building. And first of all, I just want to say that obviously in the humanitarian sector, what interests us all is the population on the ground. We want to reach the people who are in the most need. And we do see local authorities like a gateway to the people in need. They give us access to the population, but they can also be a barrier if we don't maintain a good relationship with them. This is 100% true, but what we at AGORA have noticed during our activities with the population is that local authorities have a much more important role to play. Not only do they have a role in the access of humanitarian intervention, but also in improving the quality of these interventions. And in fact, that's kind of the objective of the AGORA initiative that I work for. It's a joint initiative between the humanitarian NGO, ACTED, and the research NGO, Impact. And the initiative aims to facilitate the inclusion of local actors in humanitarian aid. Our research is produced according to participatory principles, including the entire community, and our research is focused around including that community in the prioritization and the planning of the humanitarian response in their locality. This approach, though, also led us to organize an international seminar between groups of local actors from the Central African Republic and from Niger. The exchange of ideas and of best practices had value in itself. It improved the involvement of the participants in the interventions in their own localities. However, our participants in the exchange had a lot to teach us about how humanitarians can better collaborate with them in general and in the future. So first, why did we organize this international seminar? It's a very high-level event for people who want to be touching those on the ground. But actually, this was the conclusion of a process that started very much on the ground. Here on the slides, you can see all of the steps of the AGORA project in CAR. And reading from left to right, you'll see that we began with drafting local relief plans. This was a participatory process involving members of the community, civil society, economic and local actors. One part of the relief plans, as you see, was an institutional analysis of the existing capacities and the capacity building needs of local authorities. And afterwards, after producing these plans, it is integral to the AGORA approach that the local relief plans can be used, yes, by aid organisations, but also by local actors. The relief plan is supposed to be a document that is made by and subsequently owned by the community. And a first step in assuring this is to distribute the plans to local authorities, so that local authorities can use them. However, our institutional analysis had demonstrated that this was not enough. Local authorities needed increased capacity to be able to use the local relief plans as well. And so we delivered training as a first step across the 5 regions that the project was acting in, including 148 different individuals. And at this point, having worked with local authorities for over a year in the drafting of local plans and distributing them, in delivering training in CAR, we had enough knowledge to be able to select those who were the most engaged and who would come and participate in the international conference with us. However, arriving at the end of the little diagram, it was essential from the beginning that this international seminar would still benefit those who are on the ground. And so the delegation from CAR and us, the organisers, since this seminar have been involved in disseminating the lessons learned from the conference, both in the localities outside of Bangui and in the capital, and with humanitarian actors like yourselves, for example. So as you can see, in seeking to make sure that the priorities and needs expressed by local actors were really taken into account in the interventions in these localities, we were led to involving and supporting local authorities in a variety of different ways. And that leads me on to explaining to you so there is why we did the international exchange. And now I just want to briefly explain to you some of the summary points from the many, many lessons learned that came out of our discussions. The first was that including local actors in the execution of projects improves massively the durability of these projects after the NGO has left. I think all of us know that it's fairly accepted best practice to have a good exit strategy, to leave the infrastructures or the resources that have been provided by an aid intervention with local actors, whether that be management committees, whether that be local authorities, so that they will be able to be maintained. But over in a variety of different examples, our discussions showed that if local actors aren't involved throughout the project, they don't have the information necessary and they don't have the contacts necessary to be able to maintain and to be able to protect these interventions and these infrastructures after the NGO has left. Secondly, it was repeated very, very often and found very often in our discussions that consulting local actors in the planning of interventions is going to make them much more relevant to the local context and avoid particularly the errors in project planning that we actually see quite often. Just as one example, one of the members of our delegation was the mayor of a town called Zemio in the Central African Republic, and she explained to us that 3 NGOs in 1 year had arrived to present to her, as the local authority of the region, a project to rehabilitate schools in the city. And when the second and third NGO arrived and wanted to repeat a project that had already been done, she politely explained to them that there was no need for schools. Could they please redirect their finances to other priorities in the area? But as we all know from the kind of project cycle of humanitarian aid, at that point, flexibility in changing the sector of an intervention is very, very difficult in terms of budgets, proposals, contracts. And she was very frustrated. She said, why couldn't they just come and speak to me first? I could have told them that there were already schools that had been rehabilitated and that there are other priorities. But because that contact wasn't made early enough in the process, we have this error. As I say, that's just a couple of lessons learned. Please do get in contact with me if you would like the full summary of all of the points that were brought up in the discussion. It really was very rich and very animated. I just want to draw your attention to a second part of the content of this seminar, which was the final stage, the final afternoon of our exchange, where we did some roundtable discussions with not only the delegations from Central African Republic and from Niger, but with donors, with local, with international NGOs, and with the local authorities around the same table to discuss, okay, we know that local authorities need to be involved more closely in aid interventions, but what are the methods to do that? What are the best practices to do that? And we had that around 2 discussions, thinking about projects that are ongoing, how can local actors be better involved, and also thinking about the planning of new projects. How can local authorities be more involved in future projects as well? And again, just to summarize a couple of key points for best practices for how we involve local actors. The first one was, again, to involve local actors as soon as possible. If it's possible to do it during the proposal writing stage, during the needs assessment stage, that is the ideal for a number of reasons. Not only to make sure that the priorities of the project are correct, but also to start this community engagement as soon as possible, because the sooner you start getting the community engaged, the more engaged they will be. Secondly, it was brought up that authorities shouldn't just be consulted and communicated with early in the process, but also at several steps. A lot of members of the two delegations expressed to us that often they will be very well briefed on a project when it's about to begin, but following that they have absolutely no information on the progress, they have no information on if there have been any challenges, on when it's finished. They have no knowledge whatsoever. And again, if we want local authorities to take ownership of these infrastructures and of the results of interventions at the end, we have to inform them of what we're doing. And to us, it seemed like fairly low-hanging fruit just to be able to provide a regular report of activities to local authorities, just like we do with our donors. A third and final point was that it is necessary to give local authorities the necessary means for them to be able to follow up on, take ownership of, and maintain projects after the NGO has left. In some contexts, like in the CAR context, that involved capacity building. That meant that local authorities need training in terms of their role and their responsibility and techniques for project follow-up to be able to take on this responsibility of follow-up of projects. In other contexts, however, it's when we talk about the necessary means for follow-up of projects, that could just be information. As I just mentioned, we can't expect people to follow up on our projects and to supervise the interventions in their localities if they are not provided the necessary information. And so with that, I will finish with our one big recommendation for how to improve the quality of our interventions, and that is to include local governments in the design and the monitoring of all recovery projects to improve their sustainability. It's fairly simple. There are easy strategies to do it. And once again, thank you for listening, and do get in touch with me if you want to hear more details about the discussions that were had and get a more detailed summary of all of the lessons learned and the best practices that were described during the exchange. Thanks once again, and have a good week.